Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It was arguably not the day for the Health Secretary to announce a review into junior doctors' morale. Junior doctors, by and large, are quite good at spelling out their feelings right now. And if morale is low, they know who they blame. This morning, Jeremy Hunt took the unprecedented step of imposing a new contract on thousands of medics across England. After negotiations between the government and staff broke down, he insisted, included many concessions that had been chief stumbling blocks between the sides. The Shadow Health Secretary, though, called the move a sign of failure. The British Medical Association said he'd risked alienating a whole generation of doctors, some of whom would now vote with their feet. And some hospital chiefs who'd signed a letter of agreement with the contract later stated they hadn't agreed to the imposition. So, is there a real risk of a brain drain in the NHS? And what happens to patients when trust breaks down? Here's Chris Cook.
The dispute over a new junior doctors' contract for England is finally coming to a head. Tonight, these junior doctors met on Whitehall to respond to the fact that a new contract is being imposed on them. After years of rumbling along and 2 strikes, the government has taken the advice of its lead negotiator to end talks with the doctors' union.
He has asked me to end the uncertainty for the service by proceeding with the introduction of a new contract that he and his colleagues consider both safer for patients and fair and reasonable for junior doctors.
So what exactly is this dispute between the government and the BMA all about? Well, it's been running for a few years, but it's come to a head in the last year because the Tories were elected last May on a pledge to introduce what they call a 7-day NHS. In short, hospitals should offer more services at the weekends. And to do that, they say they need to change the contracts for the 50,000 or so junior doctors so that it's cheaper to employ them during the weekend. So, this is the current period when junior doctors get normal pay, not overtime. It runs from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. on weekdays. Under the new proposals, normal evenings would end later, at 9 p.m. And work done on a Saturday during the day would also not attract overtime. So, doctors will get a boost to their basic pay to mitigate the loss of that overtime. But making Saturday a normal day is a particular frustration to doctors. What would it have taken for the BMA to be happy on Saturday pay?
I think it would have taken a recognition that junior doctors already work Saturdays for patients and will continue to do so, and to acknowledge that in the government's position that Saturday is the same as any other day of the week is just not right. Society isn't set up so that schools are open on Saturdays, you can't get a solicitor, plumbers are on call-out rates. Everybody knows that Saturdays are a bit different, and the people who work for patients on a Saturday should probably have just a little bit of extra recompense in order to compensate them for working at the weekends for patients.
The tough question now is, how do you de-escalate a conflict like this? For the Department of Health, they've got a problem, which is that if they return to the negotiating table, it will cost them political capital. It looks a little bit like weakness. For the BMA, they would have to persuade their members to accept something that they've argued about for a long time, with a health secretary that lots of doctors feel has lied to them. Doctors on the picket line seethe about Mr Hunt's claims that death rates are higher at the weekend. Now, there is evidence of that, but there isn't good evidence that staffing is the critical issue, nor that this is a cost-effective way to save lives. But a 7-day NHS was a political pledge. Doctors rarely strike. This was the last junior doctor walkout. But they do have public sympathy for their action. 2/3 of the public blame Jeremy Hunt for the dispute. So what now for the BMA?
We need to think about the implications of this, to take the temperature of our members and what they feel about this imposition of a contract that is frankly unfair. And we'll be taking into account when we do that what's happening in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, where I have to say the governments there are not pursuing this route. They're continuing to deliver the 7-day services that they have there in agreement with the medical staff and indeed agreement with all clinical staff, and moving forward in a way that the government in London has chosen not to do.
Save our NHS! Save our NHS! So what can doctors do? Well, for further strikes to work, they need to do enough political damage to the Health Secretary to force a return to negotiation. So, doctors must gauge if they could take public opinion with them through such a campaign, and whether it would be worth the likely inconvenience to patients. No wonder some are talking about seeking work elsewhere.
Well, this imposition of a contract has never been done before in the history of the NHS. So does the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, know what he's doing? I asked him earlier.
Well, it's really disappointing that it's come to this. We've wanted to discuss these changes now for the best part of 4 years. But last night, Sir David Dalton, the Chief Executive of Salford Royal, which is one of our safest and best hospitals, who's been leading the negotiations for the government, said that he didn't think a negotiated settlement was possible. And he urged me to do whatever I thought necessary to resolve the situation, because what the NHS needs now is certainty.
But you can see how this will be read, that all the time and all the money and all the costly negotiations have come to nothing because you've just imposed something.
Well, no, the negotiations had come to nothing, and he is someone who wrote to me with that judgment. He said there is no realistic chance of a deal on, particularly on the issue of Saturday pay. And this is vital because we not just have a manifesto commitment, but we have an absolute determination that if our NHS is going to offer the highest quality care, patients should be confident that they're going to get the same high quality care every day of the week.
You're looking for a 7-day NHS, but it's going to be cost neutral, so you're stretching the 5-day NHS to 7. How is that possibly going to resolve anything?
Well, that's not quite correct. Next year, we're putting in an extra £3.8 billion in real terms to the NHS. And so it will cost more. It's about meeting the clinical standards that say that every day of the week you should be seen by a senior decision maker within 14 hours of being admitted. If you're vulnerable, you should be seen twice a day.
The problem is, bluntly, that when you've got some 98% of highly trained, highly educated, dedicated junior doctors who reject this, they've read it and they say you're wrong. That's your problem now.
Well, look at that 98% figure. I mean, what was so sad was that the BMA junior doctors, instead of sitting around, they actually refused point blank to talk. They refused to enter into discussions, and they balloted for strike. And they balloted for strike saying that pay was going to be cut, which it isn't, saying that hours are going to be lengthened. In fact, we're doing the opposite. We're bringing down the maximum hours that doctors can work. So the reality is...
Well, no, that's not quite true, is it? Because, you know, there is going to be a damage, if you like, by removing penalties if doctors work excess hours. So that safety net is going to be removed. And when they tell you that they are worried about exhaustion and the knock-on effects to patient safety, why isn't that ringing alarm bells?
The problem is what we had before wasn't a penalty. It was extra pay for the doctors being asked to work unsafe hours. And so that created a perverse incentive, particularly because doctors' basic pay is too low. And so one of the things we're doing today is, yes, we're bringing down the weekend premium rates, but we're increasing basic pay by 13.5%.
You keep on telling me I'm wrong. And if that is the case, and this is what we're hearing from junior doctors, well-educated, highly trained, who've read and rejected what you're proposing, then what is the message you're giving to them, that they are wrong? They don't understand this?
Well, I fully understand in the heat of an industrial relations dispute that people aren't necessarily going to take everything on face value from the politician who's been painted as the arch enemy. But if you don't want to take the Health Secretary's word for it, listen to independent people. Today, senior NHS leaders have said, including the head of NHS England, Simon Stevens, has said that the new offer on the table is very different to what was on the table in September.
They're NHS bureaucrats. That's very easy to see through that list. They're NHS bureaucrats.
I totally disagree with that. These are very senior, respected, independent people. They say that the new contract on the table is fair and reasonable. And what I would say is that we've moved a very long way. We initially said that Saturday should be just treated like any other day of the week. We've changed that position. We've said that if you work 1 in 4 weekends or more, you can get a 30% uplift in your pay. That's a very significant concession. Now, the BMA have not been prepared to make any concessions,
right,
which is why I've had to make the difficult decision to give certainty to the service today.
So what do you do now? Because, as you're aware, the BMA have said this risks alienating a whole generation of young people working in the NHS. The best outcome, you're going to get more strikes come July, August. The worst outcome, you're going to get people voting with their feet. We've heard from doctors today who say, I don't know about my future in the NHS and I don't know about my future in this country.
Well, in a difficult situation like this, there is no risk-free route, but what I have done today is given certainty for the future. I think there would have been huge risks to the service if this uncertainty had continued to paralyse the service.
So is there a plan in place if there is a mass exodus?
Well, I don't believe it will come to that, because I think doctors will look at what was proposed and they'll also see this. When you impose a contract, which is the last thing anyone wants, you can impose anything you like, because it's by definition you've moved beyond the process of negotiation. I actually chose to impose a position which moves a long, long way to address the concerns that the BMA and many other people have expressed to me. It's a good package for doctors. And I think the other point is this. We've now had 8 studies in the last 5 years saying that mortality rates are higher at weekends. 6 of those talk about staffing rates as being one of the key factors.
Okay, and you, as you well know, have been accused of being rash and misleading for using a figure of 11,000 more deaths at the weekend when there is no evidence as to how those were created or whether your solutions would stop that.
That is not correct. And let me just say this. There was one study that had the 11,000 figure. We've had 7 other studies in the last 5 years. I don't know any doctors who are saying there isn't an issue about the weekend effect, and actually the vast majority would say that it relates to staffing. Now, I can't, as Health Secretary, sit here and say that isn't something we need to address.
How do you, as Health Secretary, work with NHS staff who don't trust you? You've alienated them, you need them on side to get the public to believe in the service, and they don't at the moment.
Well, that is unfortunately because we're in the middle of a very difficult industrial relations dispute. And if you, in any industrial relations dispute, if you ask the protagonist what they think of the other, you're going to not get particularly complimentary language. But what's the alternative? The alternative here is that in the face of a union that militantly refuses to negotiate how we can improve care for patients at weekends, that I just pack my bags and go away. I can't do that as Health Secretary. I have to be there for patients. And I actually think in the end that's the right thing for doctors as well.
Jeremy Hunt, thank you.
Thank you.
I've been getting away with it all my